What's up guys, my name is Dychronic, here on this Destiny 2 video, and today we're going to be talking about how to complete the Tier 3 Reckoning in Destiny 2's Joker's Wild. Now if you did not know, Reckoning is a 4-player activity that released with the Season of the Drifter and the Joker's Wild DLC with the annual pass. It's basically 4 players, PvE activity, you kill lots of stuff, you kill a boss at the end, and you can get some pretty cool loot for Gambit. Now recently, on March 15th, the final Tier 3 of Reckoning has dropped, and it allows you to go to the final boss area. The likeness of Orcs is now there and allows you to get extra loot, the highest possible tier of everything. Now this video is basically going to be my guide of Tier 3 Reckoning, talking about the different guns I like using and why, the different supers and subclasses are really nice, how each encounter is laid out, and how to solve each one of the things, because some of them are a bit of a puzzle and kind of need an explanation. And I gotta be honest, a lot of it can be solved very simply by a couple of very important things that make it very simple. So make sure you pay attention, you can actually learn something really nice. First off, let's go and talk about the guns. In my opinion, going with the primary weapon, I like to go with something a little bit more range. Things like pulse rifles to scout rifle distance. So like bygones, blast furnace, maybe even a bow or a scout rifle. These things are really nice in this part because you've got a lot of enemies, and I really like to chip at them from range, because if you get really close, a lot of these enemies can overwhelm you very quickly and you end up dying, having to respawn after 20-30 seconds, and it takes a lot of time to get back. For the most part, in this area, stay together, and stay at range, and it will be your friend. Next up, the special weapon. Honestly, go with Ikelo's shotgun or threat level, depending on which one you had your special weapon in. Shotguns are the best because fusion rifles don't do enough damage for their range advantage. Sniper rifles are not useful because things are going very quickly in this particular activity, and then I think grenade launchers are the last thing. They're really not that good. So honestly, go with Ikelos. It works very well. And lastly, for your heavy, you have a lot of different options. Things like Sleeper Simulant, Thousand Voices, Thunderlord, or even other types of LMGs also work really well. And lastly, I'd like to make a special shout out to Whisper of the Worm. Now, not a lot of people are using it these days because it has a lot less ammo, but I gotta say, both of the bosses, the alternating bosses, if you did not know, it alternates between the swords in the basement and the likeness of aura, depending on which week you're in. Both of the bosses kind of stand still and have really big heads to shoot at, so Whisper works really well for both of these different bosses. But honestly, use the weapon that will solve the problem that you're having. If you're having a lot of issues with adds, you might want to go with a heavy machine gun. If you're having a lot of issues with doing boss damage, you might want to go with Whisper. If you want something in between, use Thousand Voices or Sleeper. Next up, let's talk about these subclasses. For the most part, I would say only 2 subclasses are really necessary and will make your job and this whole encounter a whole lot easier. First off, a Warlock with a Well of Radiance. This makes the bridge encounter, basically solves the entire bridge encounter, makes it very easy. It makes it so you can survive a lot of the attacks, do extra damage to different bosses. Is also really useful for the third area, and is also really useful for a lot of the different modifiers. Things like attrition basically just says, hey, thanks for the extra health. I don't really care about the whole regenerating health because I do it by myself. Next up, you're going to also want a Hunter with Tether. Allows you to spawn orbs for your teammates, allows you to kill large groups of enemies, like for example the bridge section. There's a lot of enemies that come very quickly, basically solves all of your melee attackers for you, spawns a lot of orbs, especially in the bridge section, makes a lot of orbs for your Well of Radiance guys, so you can have as many Well of Radiances as you possibly can. And then lastly, as far as the other ones go with whatever subclasses basically solves your problem. So if you're having issue with the overwhelming amount of adds, you might want to go with things like that kill lots of adds, like Arc Staff or Hammers, like Nova Bomb. The new Cataclysm Nova Bomb with Dire Hamkar is so good. Highly recommend you try that. If you're having trouble with bosses, go with Celestial Nighthawk or Blade Barrage, or even Hammer Strike Titans. These things all help with extra boss damage. Basically pick what you need to be able to succeed. And the last little thing I wanted to mention about this, in the bridge section, you can, instead of using a Well of Radiance, you can also use a Titan Bubble. Works pretty much the same, basically blocks all the damage you need, and as long as you have some, tethers to give you lots of orbs, you should have no problem at all. So with the guns and the subclass out of the way, let's go ahead and talk about the different encounters. Before I do that, I just want to talk very briefly about the difference between Tier 2 and Tier 3. For the most part, there really isn't much difference. Both of them go to the end boss fight the same way. In Tier 1, you only stay in the first area. In Tier 2 and Tier 3, you both go along the bridge, and you both end up at some boss along the way. Like I was saying earlier on, both of the different bosses, the alternating bosses, either the sword guys in the basement or the likeness of aura in the overworld, both of them spawn in Tier 1, Tier 2, or Tier 3. Outside of that, the differences are probably going to mostly be affected by the power levels. Tier 2 is a 670 event, and then tier 3 is going to be a 690 encounter. And the last thing that changes between the two of them is that the enemies are going to be bigger in tier 3, like the big yellow health enemies, and they're usually going to be a few less of them. As far as the boss fight goes, there's usually a few more. And the last thing is they usually have a lot more health. So next up, let's go ahead and talk about the different encounters. First encounter, basically you got to kill enemies and you got to kill them fast. The longer you take, the more the percentage goes down. The faster you go, the faster you get on to the next area. Now, in my opinion, the best thing for this entire area, like I said, stay at range, use your pulse rifles, crunch the enemies. You have plenty of time to just do it from range. As long as you're staying with the group, you're not dying a lot, should not be a big problem. Now, that being said, if you have some Nova Bomb Warlocks, you can basically get free Nova Bomb kills, get your Nova Bomb back, kill off entire groups of enemies really quickly, and basically solve that area in 30 seconds. Basically, like 2 or 3 Nova Bombs will solve that entire area, and you get your Nova Bomb each time, because it's ridiculous and I love it with Diorama Kara. That being said, this area is really not that complicated. Most people understand it pretty simple. Next up, let's talk about the bridge section. Basically a series of control points, 6 control points in a row. After capturing one, you move to the next ice cube until you get to the final end, which is either going to be a portal or a lift to the final boss. Now, there's a couple of really important things here. First of all, you want to put a well of radiance on each one of the control points. To do that, you also have to have your tether guys basically tethering each one of the different enemy spawns, which can spawn in front of you and behind you, and that will spawn lots of orbs for your well of radiance guy. That will also spawn lots of orbs for all of your other teammates to use their supers as well. Now, for the most part, the shadow thralls and most of the yellow health enemies will be solved at that point. However, as soon as you see any yellow health enemy, you're going to want to focus it as a team. You might want to even consider using a bit of heavy here to be able to focus them down, because especially in tier 3, they can basically just melee you right off the edge with their melee blast and knock you right off the bridge and basically end your run right there and then. So as soon as yellow health enemies spawn in, make sure you focus that. And the last kind of thing in this area is the snipers. To be honest, there's really not a lot of point to shooting the snipers because they respawn so quickly and you're moving from control point to control point so quickly, and it's so hard to shoot them with all these explosions and enemies hitting you all the time. You might want to just ignore them and not have to deal with them, but if you want to, assign one person with a blast furnace or a scar rifle to basically take them out the whole time, just focusing that entirely. And finally, the boss fight is going to be one of 2 different things. Firstly, it's going to be these sword guys in the basement section. Basically, you go off and kill the glowy guys, they drop a wall of light, and you can do extra damage to the different sword guys. I believe there's 2 sword guys in tier 2. I don't know if there's more in tier 3 because we haven't seen the tier 3 of that version, but it should be pretty straightforward. If you die, just respawn, go back in. Should be pretty easy to do. The other boss fight is going to be in the overworld with a likeness of Oryx, which is a returning boss from Destiny 1. Obviously, he doesn't have the same mechanics. He is a much harder boss than Destiny 1, but in this one, his boss fight is really not that complicated. Basically, you damage him enough, then he moves to one of the 3 sides. He spawns either 1 or 2 ogres, depending if you're on tier 2 or tier 3, and he'll start doing this oversoul kind of like attack ability. So for the most part, just sit in the middle with a Radiance Rift, and he should not be that much of a problem. You're going to want to kill off the ogres as soon as possible, because if the ogres are alive when he releases the final part of his oversoul-like activity, he does extra damage, and he probably will kill you with it. So make sure you kill off those ogres as soon as possible, and then you can actually just do free damage to the boss while he's sitting there charging up his whatever. This is the perfect time to use Whisper on. Other than that, there's really not much more to it. There's going to be scions in that area. In the bottom section, there's also going to be scions. Just handle the enemies as you normally would. And that's pretty much it. There's really not much more to it. Once you finish your tier 3 or your tier 2 or whatever your tier you're doing, go back to the end where you can collect your reward and get that fully upgraded tier 3 armor for Gambit and get all those +3s in invasion or sentry or whatever you want to do. That's basically the way you do it, as well as the fact that if you do have a legendary purple triangle maker, you're going to need to do tier 3s or 4 of them each week to get the Gambit Prime weekly bounty. But that's it. That's the video. Let me know in the comments down below what you think. Let me know the way you handle the different engagements. Of course, leave a like if you did end up liking the video. My name is Dychronic, and I'll see you guys on the next.